Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. As I've said before, this high-carbon steel strapping is my favorite material for making custom springs because it's dirt cheap, in most cases free if you get it as scrap. It's readily available because this is used almost universally for binding up pallets of lumber or cinder blocks or other construction materials. So you can get it anywhere where people are unbundling lumber or other construction materials. And it's actually a pretty easy spring steel to work with. You can just heat it red hot with a torch and let it air cool to anneal it. That renders it soft enough that you can cut it with aviation snips or whatever hand tools you've got available. You can bend it into whatever shape you want. And then once you've got it in the desired configuration, you just heat it red hot again, quench it, or rather austemper it in preheated canola oil, and at that point it makes a very good spring. The question I've been asking myself lately, though, is could I make a magazine spring out of this stuff? Obviously, it would look a little different than the wire springs that are typically found in standard capacity magazines, but who cares what it looks like as long as it works. So I think I'm going to give this a try, and we'll see what happens. I started by cutting a 2-foot length of steel strapping. The strapping that I'm using measures 1/2 inch wide by 0.20 of an inch thick. Then I marked off 2-inch intervals all along the length of the strap and proceeded to bend it at each mark, alternating bend directions to make a zigzag pattern. The included angle of the bends was about 45 degrees. I had previously made a bending jig consisting of a bar with one end ground down to the correct angle and a base made of 2 parallel rods welded next to each other. This jig made it easy to make all the bends and keep the angles consistent, but a patient person could probably get the same results just bending the steel with a pair of pliers. After bending the spring to shape, I heated it red hot and then quenched it in a pan of canola oil that I had preheated to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. When the spring had cooled, I wiped off the remaining oil, disassembled a standard 30-round AR15 magazine, and replaced the magazine spring with my homemade one. Okay, so at this point I have replaced the original spring in this magazine with a homemade spring made from that steel strapping material. Now, one thing I noticed right off is that whereas with the original wire spring, the spring can be compressed until the wires themselves touch each other, with the flat steel spring, the coils will touch before the steel strapping is actually laying perfectly parallel. So I think what that's going to mean in practice is that the spring is going to take up a little bit more space in the magazine, and so we'll probably end up with a reduced capacity. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and load up the magazine and see if it works. Well, I've got 23 rounds in the magazine at this point. I might be able to stuff in 1 or 2 more, but it was really starting to get pretty difficult. In fact, I think that our homemade spring is definitely a little bit stiffer than the original factory spring, although it wasn't a huge difference for most of the loading. Anyway, I think at this point it's time to take this magazine out to the range, stick it in an AR15, and see if it runs. Okay, well, the only problem I'm having is that my glasses are fogging up and I can't see the target. But that's definitely not the fault of the magazine spring, so it seems to work. So I reloaded the magazine and did a little bit more shooting off camera, and it continued to function flawlessly. And then I was running low on ammo, and it was starting to get dark, and I was getting kind of cold, so I brought the camera back in here. In any case, I think my original question has been conclusively answered, namely, a flat steel spring like this, made of, scrap steel strapping material, absolutely can work as a magazine spring. Now, the 25% reduction in magazine capacity is definitely a drawback to using a spring like this rather than a standard wire spring, but a spring like this will function. So I think that concludes this experiment. So until next time, thank you for watching the Idahoan Show.